Wish you were here visits a luxury.
The name Stone Street appears no less than 5 times in Bartholomew's Gazetteer, in Suffolk, Surrey, Sussex, and twice in Kent. This particular Roman road starts just to the west of Canterbury, in the county of Kent, heads south, true as a die on the map at least, to Horton and Westonhanger Station, and thence across the Pilgrim's Way and past Port Lynn, down to the old seashore at West Hythe. Here's a strip of the Garden of England which avoids the worst excesses of the nearby motorways, rail links and flight paths, as well as the spreading detritus of the Channel Tunnel. Here you can still smell flowers, dream dreams and find sanctuary. It's a place of hope, close to the horrors of man's boasted progress. Peter Ironside's family name is said to go back to King Canute. Peter has lived all his life within 500 yards of where he now works at Farthing Common beside Stone Street. He started catching rabbits aged 5 and had his first garden when he was 10. At 19 he went into business as a forester in nearby Postling Wood with the slogan, "Log it and flog it." Today he runs his plant centre where everything grows well under the inspiration of his green fingers, and where, among many other things, he boasts 60 varieties of clematis.
I enjoy doing the clematis. They're very attractive plants. We sell hundreds of them. They're relatively easy to take cuttings from. They're a quick turnover crop. The biggest problem with them is the green fly. These wretched pests home in on them, and we don't spray at all because we've got lots of beneficial insects in the plant centre, so we have to either use fairy liquid to wash them off or literally just pick them off. And people like to see us doing that, and they think it's very righteous of us. This is a working nursery. We grow a tremendous amount of plants of our own, and although we do buy a few in from specialist growers, we try to grow as much as possible ourselves on site and at our other nursery. I have a love for plants, and I know when they're ready to produce growth for cuttings, and the secret of success of growing cuttings and growing plants is to know your plants very well. The robin, he's a great friend of mine. I speak to him every morning. This winter, we had to keep the plant centre closed for about a week because we had 4-foot drifts across the entire complex. I actually came up here every morning and just after dinner and an hour before dark to feed the little fella, and he really appreciated it because now he's brought a mate in. They've built a nest underneath my propagator alongside where I work a lot of the time, and the female now is sitting on 4 eggs, and 15th of April I think they're due to hatch out, and I really love him.
Hello. Hello. This is really nice. I don't know very much about it. Well, is it right in the sunshine?
It would prefer to have a bit of shade, especially in the morning.
Sometimes a customer comes in with a plant which has unfortunately ceased to live, and they come in and say, oh, this plant is dead, and I have to try and get a nice, friendly, cordial atmosphere over the problem which has arisen, and I say to the customer, Well, we never use that word dead up here at all, and that does just break the ice, and we have a nice friendly conclusion to their problem, usually by either them paying half the price for a new one, or if I feel that way inclined, I give them another plant. Because our main aim is to have happy customers, regardless of the circumstances.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
On the flat land beside Lyminge Forest near Stelling Minnis, Margaret Todd has been running her animal sanctuary for 25 years. She was born and brought up near Broadstairs on the Isle of Thanet and always wanted to have animals. But she had to wait until she was 13. Today, she's in charge of more than a score of different types of birds and beasts, a non-stop labour of love, with new arrivals coming in daily. There's obviously in you a huge love of animals, but how did it all start?
I think it just happened, and one thing just led to another. My first pet was a rabbit, and then I started breeding, and I went away on holiday with my parents, and a neighbour was meant to look after them, and we came back a couple of days early, and I thought the rabbits hadn't been looked after well enough, so I said I'd never go away on holiday and leave my animals again, and to this day I haven't. Goats aren't any different to any other animal if you make a lot of fuss of them and get to know them. There's just something develops between you. Obviously the goat's milk is very useful to us because we have so many orphan animals brought in.
Who's this, Margaret?
This is Rosie. He's a large white boar.
And where on earth did he come from?
You won't believe this, but he was living on a balcony in high-rise flats in the Medway towns. Somebody bought him when he was about so big, and when he got about so big, they thought he
Started getting worried about
him.
Dear, oh dear, you just can't imagine people doing that.
No.
Where have these come from? And why are they so wary? I mean, you expect them all to be crowding around you, grabbing sandwiches and
That's
so on.
right. Well, they've never been handled by man. We had a call from Devon, from an animal sanctuary in Devon, and these horses, they've been living there for about 10 years on land that was meant to be used for farming, and the land was going to be repossessed, and no one would take the horses because they were completely wild and never been handled, and they couldn't take them, so they've ended up here. The two foxes in the bottom of the run, those two are hand-reared. We try to get them to go back to the wild so that we can release them, but these particular two, they just stayed so tame that we couldn't give them complete release, and this is why we've had this area built for them.
And do you reckon that their cubs will get out into the wild with these?
We hope so, yes. Yes, that's the idea.
It must be absolutely fabulous having them.
Oh, it is.
You.
Yes, I mean, after a hard day's work, I go over there and sit with them, and they bite my ears and play with my hair, and it's very relaxing. You know, it's lovely because you're not forcing wild animals to be friendly. You know, they're being friendly because they want to be.
Les Birch's great-great-grandfather, who was landlord of a Deal pub, came up to Gibbons Brook, close to Stone Street, in 1849. Here he sired 18 children, and 5 generations of the family have now worked here as farmers, contractors and engineers.
How are we getting on? All right? Slowly. Slowly. Last time that was used, Dick, David, was in about 1947 on some of our last old steam engines.
Over the decades, the Birches have hung on to and collected scores of old machines, steam engines, tools and equipment, much of it going back to the early days of agricultural mechanisation.
When you go back to my boyhood days, 6 years of age when it started, it was always sort of bred in amongst the family that someday I might, as the old folk used to say, well, when I'm dead and gone, you might come in line. And they said, that young lad out there, he's watching all the steam engines, he watches the people in the workshop, and he talks to these old boys out there. And I firmly believe that from that age on, mixing with the older people, it rubs off on you, and it grows. We used to do a lot of work for a deep well, pump work. And Grandad used to put the valves in this little lathe. And that's where I learnt about deep well pumps and all what went with it, because this little lathe could turn those valves, precision work, and you could stop and start when you like. It's a treadle lathe, change gear, and I think this lathe stems back to around about 1880, 1890. On my wife's side, her family used to be scissor grinders, cobblers, and went back a long way, and they also lived in the village of Sellinge. When I first met my wife, my mum and dad, they weren't very favourable towards her because she came from a cobbler. You know, it was a hard work job. Poor old boy put in many hours, and I don't think they really wanted me to get hooked up with a cobbler's daughter. The steam engines came in after the horse ploughing. And when you think back that the old great-great-grandfather who started the business here started with a sickle, a scythe, moved on to the horses, and horses get tired. You know, there's a limit to what they can do, but when we changed from horses to the steam engine, you might as well say it hasn't got a lot of feeling. The only time it's got feeling is if you get too much pressure and it blows up. I started driving when I was 7 years of age, and I used to drive around these very fields here, end of May, June, haying. Used to have a trailer or a cart hung on the back, and it used to be great fun. It was a single crank, 5 horsepower barrel, and that was always called Leslie's engine. And I used to drive that little old engine. They'd start me off, and I used to steer it for him first. Then I got to that I could drive it, 7, 8, 9 years of age, and I could handle it like a man of today.
In her lovely garden beside Stelling's 13th century church, Margareta Kirkham, who comes originally from Sweden and who fell in love with England as an exchange student in 1947, works and enjoys her views on a misty April morning. When she was 15, her father told her that she would choose a lonely profession, and he was right. Her many skills now include pottery, stained glass, embroidery, and the most intricate of knitwear.
Maybe I've inherited a bit of my father's engineering skills in the fact that I do like machines. I suppose it's something about design. I mean, there is always a designer behind anything that you touch in this world, whether it's a teapot or even a computer. There is a designer behind it. But this machine, it's so ingeniously done, and it all fits out. It's like mathematics, you know. If you do it right, it can't go wrong. I like to do my designs with pencil and paper because you get the right feel then, and also you can do it on this roll that I use in the machine. So I put it down on the floor, get down on my hands and knees and just take a pen and go draw a big flower or something with a bud on the side and a leaf, and then you just put it in the machine and start knitting. Simple. It's wonderful just to sink yourself into whatever you're doing, concentrate on it. And I don't play the radio or listen to talk or music or anything. So it really is lonely, but I prefer it that way because all I have to do is to look up and look out through the window, and there it all is. Just what I've always wanted, peace and quiet.
The Jacksons began their fencing business at Stouting Common in the 1950s as a father and son operation, a small sideline on their 78-acre farm. Today, Ian Jackson and his son Richard employ more than 100 people making gates, posts, fences, and every other kind of wooden or metal barrier. What was an offshoot of the famous Kent chestnut coppicing tradition has now become an important local industry, now in its third generation with Richard Jackson.
Now it's April, it's exceptionally busy. All of the farmers are putting stock out in the field. The general public are getting out into the garden at long last. Now it stopped snowing. Everyone's just about rushed off their feet. Busiest time of the year by a long shot. These riven oak rails, they're for the post and rail fencing. It's a traditional fence for this area, and Sussex, used in mortised posts, goes alongside of roads, very traditional in its look, very rustic in its appearance. Yeah, the majority of the timber's locally grown. The chestnut obviously is within about a 20-mile radius of the depot, so it's in the Denge wood in Chartham. The softwood comes from a little further afield, and the gate timber again a little further afield, but most of it's local. My grandfather, who in fact died in the 60s, I'm sure would be very surprised. I've been working here for a little over 20 years, and the transition has been immense. The changes happen very, very quickly, and the place has grown very quickly. So yes, I'm sure he'd be very surprised.
Gate assembler John Murray is the son of a pigman who was once a farm worker himself. His family goes back 500 years in the area. Today, his job is to make gates for farmers all over the country, and further afield too.
Well, my average is about 48 to 52 gates a day, which ain't too bad. They're good, strong gates, and they last 25 years or more. They'll still be about when I'm gone, I expect. It's nice walking through the country, so I open my dogs and coming across one of the gates I've actually made, which I can pick out all my gates quite well. Yeah, it's very satisfying.
Kent peg tiles have been cladding and decorating the county's houses for centuries, and there's still demand for the work of potters and tile makers like Clive and Rosemary Robus from Hastingby. Clive was born in Folkestone, and they both trained in Cornwall before settling here in Evington Park 16 years ago. Now they have orders for a whole variety of products from across Kent and Great Britain, and also from America, Europe, and recently from Mustique in the West Indies.
We're making some tiles at the moment. They're like lawn edgings for a garden in the West Indies. It's a Hindu garden, and the shape of a jarley is laid out with the lawn edgings, and each jarley will be planted up with different coloured flowers. It's quite a grand garden, actually. The idea is so when the owner, when he flies over it, it looks a little bit like a Persian rug. The clay we use comes from Swansea. It's straight dug from the ground and comes in a tipper. Trent's shovels clay into the top of a pug. He then adds grog to it and water. This mixes it. The grog is actually a crushed fire brick, which mixes with the clay, and the pug mills will extrude the clay out of the other end. It's a good mixed body. It's good for moulding. It's also good for casting. Not so good for throwing. The clay we use for throwing comes from Stoke and is a much refiner body.
The pots were originally thrown by hand by Clive, and we then take a plaster cast of it out of plaster of Paris, and we then make a press mould of it. The pot is filled with clay and left for a few days in the plaster cast. It's then cracked open, it's then fettled by myself, and it's then sprigged. The sprigs we use are quite sort of classical Italian, like Renaissance sprigs, fruit and swags and ribbons, which are quite a bit over the top, but quite traditional. And the clay we use is quite a nice groggy clay, which gives it a nice coarse texture.
Two or 3 years ago, we thought it would be a nice idea to do a Chinese warrior. There was a lot of publicity about the find in China and stuff, and we did it originally as an interior piece. It was a nice thing to be able to come in and hang your hat on, that sort of idea. That was the general idea of it. And we actually took it to a design show, and it didn't do that well. So it also went to a garden show, which Hampton Court, and it did. We started getting a lot of orders for it, for Chinese gardens and that sort of thing. You can see it, we'd make him in terracotta, also in a buff, but it would be nice to see him glazed, to see his uniform coming out in the colours that it should be. We like very much where we live. We like the guys we work with, we like the environment, and working with clay is the only thing that we do well, so it's really the only thing worth doing.
In the first decade of the century, the writer and poet Edward Thomas came to this precious part of Kent and wrote, "Even the motor road is pleasant now when the nightingales sing out of the bluebell thickets under oak and sweet chestnut and hornbeam and hazel." Thus it is at Stone Street, very small, a few oaks up to their knees in blackthorn, gorse and bramble, with dusty edge and the hum of the telegraph wire for a song. Alas, the nightingales have in the main moved on, and the telegraph wires no longer sing an accompaniment to them, but much else that the poet saw and praised remains to be admired 90 years later, a rare piece of encouragement as the century draws to a close.